have captains of the industry from different sectors, and I'll take a quick couple of minutes to introduce the reason why we started this series. Being conscious about sustainability, taking decisions which are driven by that consciousness is what everybody tries to do. What we are trying to do in this series is to provide a voice on a sustained basis to reasons for circular economy, to recognize diversity of the stakeholders and provide voice to each one of the stakeholders, to make sure that there are professionals who are invited who discuss needle-moving ideas and approaches for taking forward circular economy related activities, making sure that circular economy and projects associated with circular economy move from the CSR table to business strategy table in organizations, and does help create an all new ecosystem of new generation, new technology businesses. The first in this series was a very, very involved and interesting discussion. I am very sure that even the second would be a similarly involved and engaging discussion. Our idea behind inviting you, ladies and gentlemen, is to invite people from organizations which are visionary and to invite committed leaders. We want to explore dimensions associated with where can innovation take us. We want to explore dimensions associated with what could be done with policy. We want to explore dimensions associated with what type of investments are required and does act as a catalyst to the process of creating circular economy based businesses.
My first question to Namita is the emergence of ESG focused funds and investor participation, which is growing. Could you share your views on the changing ESG investment landscape and how is responsible reporting driving this change? Over to you, Namita.
Thank you very much, and I'm so glad to be here with everybody with common interests, common and diverse interests. If we were looking at ESG a few years back, in fact, I started off in 2012 with the topic of ESG. It was a very fuzzy concept, but today linkages have been established well with investments and finance. We've seen how startling statistics on freshwater availability, air pollution, emissions, income inequality, corporate governance lapse, coupled with the realization that there is a financial implication, and this is all triggered ESG investing market in India. So there has been a focus. On the investor side, I would like to just highlight a few things. Over the last 3 years, the ESG equity mutual fund space, the Indian market currently has 10 ESG equity mutual funds, out of which 7 came up in the last 1 year. And as of March 2021, these 10 mutual funds managed assets of approximately 1.4 billion USD, of which 7 new funds brought about 700 million in new inflows. What is seen is that the growth of 3 times, this is the growth of 3 times year on year, but it remains to be only about 1.1% of the overall equity mutual fund AUM in India. And of course, the ratio has plateaued out in the last quarter, obviously on account of COVID lockdowns and lack of investor education, decreasing the pool of probable investors. We've also seen new funds of funds emerge, like the HSBC's Global Equity Climate Change Fund that invests in innovative solutions towards climate change, or BNP Paribas' fund which invests in water value chains. Apart from these, of course, we've seen the AIF's link to ESG, and there have been announcements of raising over $1 billion. But there has been limited success as funds are seen to be gravitating more towards equity, ESG equity kind of products. Now, if you come to the questions that you asked, typically a lot of ESG investing in India is based still on benchmarks, matrices, and cutoffs. So over the past 2 years, there have been a number of ESG commitments, but it is very important to understand the nature of investments. I was going through a Morningstar report which shows that different methodologies are used while investing, and there is no standard framework. I think that's pretty known. Very few use bottom-up proprietary stock selection processes. Moreover, 2 out of 3 older ESG funds that were issued are seen to invest a minimum of only 80% in ESG type stocks, with 20% of allocation to non-ESG stocks. Hence, these funds, I don't know whether we should call them 100% ESG compliant. And incidentally, these two funds make up almost 50% of the assets of the 10 ESG mutual funds AUM. So the skew is perhaps translating into this flattish kind of proportion. And in short, I think we analysts, investors, need to dig deeper into really looking at what is the ESG quotient or what really qualifies as 100% 100% ESG. There are certain biases where most funds carry a large cap kind of a bias, mainly due to poor performances of companies on ESG parameters beyond the top 100. And then we all agree that there is a lack of uniformity in disclosure standards. Of course, with the BRSR coming up, India will have the business responsibility and sustainability reporting. India would have some kind of a level playing field, and companies would have a standard to look at. What we've also seen is that there is traction on, 10 Indian asset managers and intermediaries have signed up to the UNPRI. The inception of sustainability benchmark indices, including the S&P ESG India Index, has led to the clamor in improving ESG ratings. So, frankly, when I stepped out of my financial institution role to start up this ESG in the mid of 2020, ESG was not so much talked about. But suddenly today we see that everybody is gravitating or everybody is very attracted towards this terminology. And I think one last point that I want to make here is that the rise in investor interest has translated into relative outperformance in the capital markets also. So the MSCI India's ESG leader index graph gives an overview of the index performance of companies, and the graph really indicates how companies with high sustainability performance outperform their peers, and the trend is becoming more visible even during the COVID years, when the concentration has been on softer or social disclosures in terms of human capital, how workforce is being treated, what are the salary, wages, etc. Global regulatory legislations and actions like the EU taxonomy, the TCFD mandate, yesterday the US Congress approving the climate change and ESG disclosure requirements for public companies in the US, all this will have the cascading effect on emerging markets. And I think it is very important for India to look at a kind of a comprehensive reporting framework, rating models that will deliver consistency and accuracy in data, and also provide a kind of intra-sectoral comparison of companies for investors to look at investing. The Ministry of Finance has put out a task force on sustainable finance which aims towards this, and I think by next year we should have some ESG framework for Indian banks and investors to really look at.
I would now move to Santosh, and since Santosh recently wrote about this, and Santosh, could you highlight the sustainable financing scenario and specifically on BRSR and for ESG parameters reporting and its likely impact on investments in the clean energy sector? If you could highlight on these.
Terminology is not something new, although it would have hit anyway, many of the people as a new terminology. But it is first referred in a publication called Who Cares Wins in 2005, and that was the publication which the UN brought out to the investors, saying that whoever cares on these three, E, S and G, would win on the long term. So that was the kind of underlying message in that publication. But post that, I think the terminology laid low, and terminologies like sustainability and corporate responsibility and all those kind of things were more often used. But I kind of used Google Trends to dig up the use of these terminologies and do a comparison. 2018 is when ESG started picking up. And today ESG has surpassed the use of sustainability. Every other kind of nomenclature, it has kind of surpassed. So what happened in 2018? So I think the big shift, I would say, was from the big investors. It was Larry Fink's letter. I think that was the critical element of this uprise. And then State Street, and then World Economic Forum, the stakeholder, capitalisms, and all those kind of things. So I think those were the trends which kind of really pushed this particular thing. But as Namita said, 2020 has been a kind of a very critical year to accelerate this. I call this as an ESG 2.0, because you had the 1.0, which is from 2005 to about 2018-19. And what you have is the 2.0, because 2.0 is a little different when money starts chasing ESG. Earlier to that, it was more about goodwill, reputation, all those kind of things. But, the real money started chasing, then the scenario changes. You have a different perspective. So I think this is the ESG 2.0. And second is also the problem is that people suddenly start realizing that the risks are precipitating. You had the first so-called climate change related bankruptcy. And so I think those are some of the kind of things which kind of push us. And then, of course, the pandemic. The pandemic makes you realize what can be a global impact. And that fears drives many things. At least for the pandemic, you have a vaccine. But for climate change, I don't think you will have a vaccine. So I think those would be the kind of critical things which kind of changes the dimension into a different. And so money started flowing. You have more mutual funds. You have more. But even today, the reality is that I would say, it's still lazy investing. That would be the term I would use, because if you really start analyzing many of these mutual funds and all, almost 50-55% of them is IT industry and banking. Now, that's not ESG. You pick what is convenient is lazy investing. So I think it's kind of yes, early days. Let's give that leeway, early days. And the other problem is, there are, everybody wants to kind of make their presence felt in a situation like this. That's also you have more ESG ratings, you have more ESG standards. You have everybody coming out with their own disclosure requirements. You have countries coming out with their own disclosure requirements. And as Namita mentioned about the Sustainable Finance Act, I am part of that task group. So I can also say that EU has a separate taxonomy. You have Singapore coming out with something. South Africa came out, and we are also coming out with our taxonomy. So I think it's more like the IFRS and Ind AS. So we Indianize most of the things, and even on the reporting side, we have the BRSR. Yes, it's a progression from what we had on the business responsibility reporting, and it kind of brings out some of the international requirements now into the forefront, and we definitely would see a higher level of disclosure. My only caution is that, again, I would say, the quantity of disclosures is different to the quality of the disclosure. And as a person who has been involved in doing assurance around some of these data, I can tell you the data is never comparable.
Jigar, you have a very close interaction with from the investor side, and could you share your views on how this emphasis on sustainable reporting, the responsible investing, is really taken up by the investing community?
In terms of the investors, I believe that the situation is pretty fluid. So when we look at the different regions globally, it's very different. For example, the Europeans have started much earlier, so they have a more elaborate taxonomy. They have more proper definition in terms of how the fund should invest, how the company should report. They have the SFDR, they have the EU taxonomy. United Kingdom is coming out with its own taxonomy, and then you have other various institutions working on the ESG. So I think they are completely alive to the idea of sustainability, ESG, and it is embedded in their day-to-day life. That's what I have observed, and that comes out in their investment philosophy and practice as well. America is definitely a lot of voluntary work has happened. So Europe is a lot of regulatory work that has happened, and ultimately you need regulatory requirements for people to fall in line. In America, it's more of voluntary so far. So you see the large investment banks and they are following all the major disclosures, but there are some thousands of smaller banks and non-banks who have very little idea about this concept. And on one of the recent seminars which I attended, it was being mentioned that this is one of the big areas in which America needs to get together, is act quickly. And when you come to Asia, probably Japan is reasonably ahead. China is also taking good steps, and Korea, Japan, China have announced their net zero targets as a country. Asia, the rest of Asia is just doing okay. Singapore, of course, is doing pretty well, as you would expect. But elsewhere, I think it is just catching up. The larger companies who have a sort of requirement of being in the index, or it's more of a reporting requirement. I see that in a very large number of cases, it is the reporting requirement which results into their disclosures rather than it being embedded in their DNA. So the ESG is more of a bolt-on ESG. It is not done by the top person. It's not done by the CEO, but there is a department, and there are consultants who would do the work. So I believe the same situation exists with the investment industry also.
The bioenergies, of course, play a very vital role in enhancing clean energy, inclusive economic growth, and enabling enterprise. Could you highlight the challenges faced by entrepreneurs, if you could highlight those?
Thank you, Manish, and I'll do that. And but let me also give you a little contextual thing about bioenergy, and also linking that to sustainability.
Sure. Yeah.
So the good thing of talking after Santosh is it gives you cues. So it was interesting you mentioned about 150 years for accounting to reach where it is. So in the same way, if I look back, it took about 150 years ago, fossil fuels replaced biomass as the primary source of energy. And at the end of 150 years, it looks like it's getting nudged out. So that's the only thing in accounting, say, I think you're stable, and here we are trying to see how we can nudge it out. Now, as far as biomass is concerned, it has not only been the genesis of fossil fuel, but without doubt the forerunner. Hence, when we talk of in the context of sustainability, that means decarbonization playing a role in energy transition. The advantage of bioenergy is it can address the entire value chain of energy, whether it's electricity, whether it's heating and cooling or cooking, whether it's mobility. So when we look at biomass or bioenergy, we have to look at it as equivalent of fossil fuels. So we have to look at it as solid, liquid, and gaseous. So just as we distinguish fossil fuels as solid, liquid, and gaseous, and within solid, liquid, gaseous, like if it's solid, we distinguish between lignite, we distinguish between coal, different grades of coal. In the same manner, biomass should have to be distinguished. Now, another thing is we may need to make a distinction of modern biomass and traditional biomass. So again, to take a cue from Santosh, he spoke of lazy investing. So what I find is that we have a lazy investing attitude of still continuing to invest on first generation biofuels, which, I'm not being critical of any particular geography or any particular government, but if I talk of ethanol, whether it's in the US or whether it's in India, we tend to take the easy option of fermenting sugars. Now, fermenting sugars was done actually more than 150 years ago. I think it was in 1855 or something when ethanol was produced to light lamps. So there's nothing so dramatic about fermenting sugars, and there's so much evolution that has taken place in the last 20 years in biotechnologies. You see, biotechnology had a focus on healthcare and agriculture. And it's really in the last 15 years that biotechnology focus towards energy has also come about, So we need to get out of this lazy investing thing to exposing us a little bit of risk. The other important thing is the terminology modern biomass. I mean, I first heard this in an IEA presentation in Marrakesh. They were trying to focus on bio-waste as modern biomass, okay? And even in end of March this year, the World Biogas Association, they made a presentation and they published a report which they presented to the UN Secretary General. And they said 105 billion tons of bio-waste is globally generated annually. That's a humongous number. They said if we just process a reasonable portion of this bio-waste, 10% of GHG emission by 2030 will take place. So this is modern biomass. This is not lazy investing. Now, here is where the points that Namita made are very important, and Santosh actually about ESG finally getting mainstream. I feel that this is where when you convert bio-waste into a form of usable energy product which replaces fossil fuels without disruption. What you want is, I'm having devices which are using fossil fuels. Can you give me a product which is sustainable, low carbon, and replaces that? Okay. So that is where this modern biomass and modern biotechnologies are coming in. And we can have a wide spectrum of such technologies. And honestly, really, if you take 2 weeks ago, was it 2 weeks ago, a fortnight ago, something where there was disruption. First was the Dutch court on Shell, and then the, shareholders activism on, Exxon and Chevron. This is breathtaking. So what is going to happen is people are really going to start looking at disclosures with greater intensity. Most of our first generation biofuels will not stand the scrutiny of carbon footprint. I may just add, which is very interesting because I thought I'll share it with you. In our, BRICS Business Council Energy and Green Economy Working Group, we have put a topic of carbon footprint. We have put a topic of green certification. And surprise, surprise, this has not come in this year under Indian presidency. It came in last year under Russian presidency. So, we are getting conscious. We can't run away from the fact of carbon footprint or, green certification, etc. And this will, of course, come in a far more sophisticated fashion under some ESG reporting. But when that comes in, that is the last cue I take from Santosh. Money will start chasing advanced biofuels. That is what's to happen. We need the pull factor. We need the pull factor coming in because the market demands and not the push factor. For too long, bioenergy, it takes me back to about something like 2006 or 7. I was speaking in a conference, I forget where, South Africa, Mozambique, and I was talking about bioenergy, and someone actually got up and made a very, "Sir, why don't you want us to develop?" So I said, "I'm sorry." He says, "No, development is progressing from bioenergy to fossil fuels, and you don't want us to develop." So for too long, the mindset was, "Oh my God, we're doing so much development, we're creating local jobs, we're helping farmers." No, I'm sorry. It doesn't work in today's world. Money chases what makes money or what is mandated. So when we can show that we meet more of the ESG metrics, out of the 17 SDGs, we probably will end up by meeting 10 of the SDGs. On greenhouse gas emissions abatement, we will have a far greater abatement than any other form of renewable energy when you process bio-waste to advanced biofuels. So when that happens, money will chase these technologies and these projects.
On the subject of this sustainable financing, attracting finance for your venture for energy transition to clean fuels, Monishji, could you please share your experiences in raising funds for PRESPL?
Thanks, And I think my experience of raising funds has been effective storytelling. Finding that capital is actually about truth, is actually about walking the talk and being able to do it from the ground and then bring it to the business model, rather than looking at Excel sheets and then going to the ground and failing. So what we have done is actually not chased capital. And each of the rounds of capital that you say successfully we have raised, capital has chased us. The banking channel has only come as recently as 4 months back. So the entire 10-year journey is based on equity capital only. So we have burnt capital. Having said that, a banker looks at funding somebody who's already put them down in the dumps because the banker doesn't want to die. So a capital of ESG would chase somebody where they are already stuck for their primary capital to come back, rather than looking at a sustainable business model, which maybe could have more chances of failing, but that does not get supported in the financial world. So when Responsibility invested in Presswell in 2013, and at that point of time, every kg of biomass that we move, we actually make a delta on it. So why are we not making money? Why is it that we are not profitable? Why is it that we are not successful? And that's where we realize that the industry that we are targeting to support, which is biomass going into electricity, is not going to be sustainable because electricity rate or price is coming down. So if I have to look at supporting biomass or bioenergy in a segment where the commodity itself is going southwards, nobody is going to buy a biomass-based power. And that kind of brought us back to say, let's look at the other segment. What another important factor which we looked at internally is the electricity segment is only 18% of the energy basket. And we are looking at servicing the 18% and leaving the 82%, which actually requires the bioenergy support. Cooking, transportation, aviation, you name it. Alternate gaseous fuels, liquid fuels. So why do we need to compete with the solar and wind in the 18%? Let's start competing for our space in the 82%. And so we shifted. And when we started looking at the 82%, a cycle of the downward trend, which was only crashing, started looking upwards. Trend of the business started. At that point of time, we were not aware that the shells of the world are tracking us. And the importance there is that our magnitude of a foresight of a business of bioenergy, being leaders in the market in India today, was only 2 to 3 years. It was about survivability. But the larger players or the larger corporates of the world have a horizon of 30, 40, 50 years, whereas they track the sustainability part, the ESG part, the conversion or the alternate energy part much better than we do in the Indian horizon. And I think that's where we need a tactical shift in the Indian mindset of starting to do these things in a different manner, to look at a 50, 60 year horizon of our energy rather than a 2-3 year kind of a basket.
When we talk about the sectors and sub-segments of the industry, especially we are talking about the energy transition and how these investments are actually impacting or attracted in the energy transition, renewables or bioenergy in specific, if you could expand on this.
Thanks. Yeah, I will come to that, but I think, I just want to respond to some of the conversations that happened in, when we talk about ESG financing or ESG investing as far as India is concerned, one must understand that currently the core investment philosophy or the core lending philosophy does not include ESG. nor is it required from a regulatory lens, barring priority sector lending or barring some impact investment that a particular financial institution may want to do. So it is more of theme-based kind of investing. So therefore, and very rightly, as Santosh said, that if you look at these 10 large funds, you would see that 70% or more than 70% of these investments have gone into IT, financial services, and energy to some degree. But again, this is large scale, utility scale energy projects and not really climate linked sectors where there is a huge opportunity. So today, India, the biggest investment opportunity for India is over $3 trillion from now till 2030. And this includes, like we said, multiple sectors. Even within the renewable energy, most of the financing is happening to utility scale, but not to, smaller projects. And that is where the gap is. And this investment gap is largely because of this overall ESG thinking that we are talking about from financial institutions, because ultimately financial institutions think from a risk and return standpoint, right? And risk is not objective. Risk is lot of perception of risk. So financial institutions are really looking to eliminate, mitigate, manage or transfer the risk. And that is the perspective. Secondly, it is very easy to finance traditional businesses. So renewable energy has become, as good as traditional now. When we started renewable energy financing, it was difficult at that time, but today it's more traditional. So investing in a renewable energy business at a utility scale, may it be solar, wind, it's much easier. But when you look at an off-grid, or if you look at, biomass, or if you look at, other sectors, the risks are not known. Because where are the risk professionals? Where are the ESG risk professionals within financial institutions? And I think that is the focus that one should really look at. Transition finance takes a large amount of platform, and this is where directly hard to abate sectors can be financed to bridge the gap. So transition finance internationally has evolved, and it is for those sectors which are not green today, cannot become green tomorrow, but can and need to get greener, so become less brown. So that is really where transition finance is coming from, and it's internationally, it has a credible definition. There is an ambitious target that has been taken by certain entities, but ultimately, how Indian financial institutions tag ESG finance, or how do they look at it as a core investment philosophy, is something that is one must look at. On your energy transition example, I just want to say one very small thing. It's very clear. IRENA study says that $1 spent in energy transition can deliver returns between $3 to $8, right? But given this whole potential, how do we want to exploit this, or how do we want to really get it on this? The renewable energy sector has got policy support, concessional facilities, credit enhancements that have been done, but the same kind of support is not there for low carbon projects. Similarly, for biomass.
Santosh, on this transitioning to cleaner energy and green financing, another jargon which is getting used, what is your view, and what needs to be done by the stakeholders to accelerate this transition to cleaner energies?
See, there are two schools of thought. One is, as Jigar mentioned, the Europe is a little more advanced school of thought, which is a binary, that you only finance, or you call anything as sustainable finance under their sustainable finance taxonomy as only clean things. Now, being part of the task force in India, it's kind of a little tough for us, not considering the transition, because many of our organizations, and they will undergo a transition, and where is that finance going to be? So it's kind of a tough road for us to take that EU journey. Okay, now, but the problem here is that the moment you say, people use this term just transition, and I say the word just, please use it as adjective just, not the other way around, because it becomes very, then the transition becomes incremental, and anything and everything become transition. So I think there is a bit of a what I can say, a clarity or a clear path we have to take when we talk about this sustainable finance or green finance. Like everything, every color, you can say even the green has 50 shades. And so there would be those shades which you would have to kind of consider as well. But one thing I'll tell you is that slowly, it's really slow, but what is happening is that people are realizing the true cost economics in this. Okay, because slowly the so-called intangibles are becoming tangibles. So you have a kind of a valuations around natural capital. You heard the Supreme Court come out with what is the value of a tree and all those kind of things. So I think slowly you have the valuations coming in the natural capital, valuations coming in the social capital as well. Now those things, once it comes, what happens is that the so-called intangibles become tangible, and then you are able to kind of judge what is the true cost economics, which is not something new. I mean, if you really look at it, as early as 1920, Arthur Pigou came out with the Pigovian tax in UK, and which is nothing but a kind of a reducing the externality cost by the business. That's what the Pigovian economics was about as well. So I think the slow movement, which if it can be fast-paced, that would aid towards better kind of decision making in this green financing. But one more dimension which Namita mentioned, I would like to kind of expand it with a bit of with an example, is that when you're financing green also, you need a different lens. I did this kind of a discussion with many fleet owners on the EV side. And the fleet owners, very simple, they said that we are all ready. I mean, electric vehicles, we are ready to kind of change our fleet into electric vehicles. Where is the problem? The problem is that there is not even a single lender who has a differentiated product here. Everybody knows that, I mean, Tesla is giving you a warranty to go to the moon and come back, which means that the maintenance as well as the life of the vehicle is higher. Now, why would you apply the same tenure of a diesel vehicle to an electric vehicle and say you have to pay the loan in this time? Who is giving a tenure difference? So each one of these green investments which we are looking into need to be looked into with a different lens, and that requires knowledge about that sector. That requires a deep understanding about the, as I said, the true cost economics or some of those kind of things to really come out with those different. I think that until unless that differentiation happens, green financing, as Colonel Sir mentioned, is that today most of the interesting or all the case studies on impact investing, sir, is impact plus more than conventional returns. Only those make case studies of impact investing. Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
So I think we will remain over there. So yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, I like the just investing, and I also liked when Namita said lesser brown, another color shade. You said different shades of green. Jigar bhai, a quick comment from you on the clean energy as a focus area by investors while looking at the green investing. Quick comment from you, Jigar bhai.
Yeah, thanks. So if we look at in the Indian context, what's happening is that this area is over time significantly captured by the private equity, who have lesser cost of capital, and also the government policies have made more sense for them to come in, and because government is the off-taker through SECI, etc., it is kind of helping channelize foreign flows into that activity. So as far as utility scale is concerned, it is quite easy to get the funding for these projects. And despite of that, I mean, we have not seen the most desired level of capacity addition every year. But clearly, when it comes to the smaller, the rooftop or the other financing, like until this ethanol blending took place, and now that it has come into limelight, government has advanced its time frame from 2030 to 2025 and then 2023. We did not realize the scale that it can bring. And then because I wrote a note on Praj Industries a few months ago, and I've been tracking that company over the years. I mean, there is a lot you can do on biodiesel, there is a lot you can do on biogas, and I think Mr. Krishnan very well mentioned in the beginning about the advanced biofuels, the cellulosic material or the algae.
Yes.
There's so much that can be done, but all those areas are ignored. And if actually you have a focus on cutting out some of the emissions, let's say if you have to cut down your emissions by 35 to 45% in this decade, then all these things will count. And perhaps there is not so much amount of financing available over there. And that is also requiring a lot of innovation. If somebody puts mind to that, including banks, all stakeholders have to sit together, we can have a significant amount of positive results over there. So yeah, that's my
stakeholders coming together. Yeah, right. You mentioned about Mr. Krishan's comment and advanced biofuels and the new technologies. Mr. Krishan, at the BRICS committee as well as at the FICCI committee on climate change, you are very close to the policy formulators as well as policy advocacy. I would like your inputs, sir, on the current landscape and evolving opportunities, especially related to the bioenergy segment. And what are the key policy issues that you are working on, Mr. Krishan?
So once again, I'll start by taking cues from Santosh. Just can be fair. But I personally feel this is, in the bioenergy sector, as I've said earlier, constantly extolling the socio-economic, environmental benefits is not going to cut much ice with Namita, and I won't blame her. If I was in her shoes, I would also have the same problems. Because ultimately, we are accountable to board, we are accountable to shareholders, etc. So we have to get into a situation of just now. Now, when the Dutch court has told Shell that 45% devolves on you, what the Dutch government has taken devolves on you, I'm sorry, Shell has got into a just now situation. Shell is supporting a 20-ton per day bio-LNG project. I mean, it needs to. And I'm not talking only of Shell, I'm talking about the NGs, I'm talking about the large companies. There is a dramatic mindset change that has taken place in the last few months. The other thing is the true cost. True cost can only come from carbon pricing. I did a pioneering project in 2001. In 2002, the PPA was reneged. I went to the regulator and the distribution utility said they will honor it. They did not. But that happened to be the project that delivered the world's first gold standard CRs. And right up to 2012, we never sold below 20 euro a CER. So we were getting in about 350 to 400,000 euro on top of what should be a normal PPA. And that is what kept our head above water. So honestly speaking, the transition, even if you look at it, you read an analysis of, nations which are planning a hydrogen economy, anything. For every transition, there's a carbon cost. Canada says right now the carbon cost has to be $200 a ton. And by 2030, we hope to bring it down to $100 a ton. So there has to be the cost element. Now, when we talk of policy, there are two types of policies, Manish. One is a policy which is driven by governments. Another is a policy which is driven by markets. And I think this has become very important because of, hopefully Glasgow is going to be more open this year. Hopefully the Paris rule book is going to be approved. Hopefully Article 6 and in particular Article 6.4 will kick in. When that kicks in, we will be having a situation of, markets which can have a role to play. So what we have done as a first step under the BRICS Business Council. I'm underlining Business Council because as BRICS Business Council, we don't represent the nation. We recommend to the leaders. But actually, I must give credit to Omkar. It was his suggestion. He chairs the BRICS Business Council. So we have put together a note, and which all the regional chairs have approved, of establishing a clean energy fund under NDB. So if New Development Bank can invest, I think co-investing another 60%, 70% is not such a big problem. So that's the kind of framework we're working on.
Yeah.
The other thing that we have put a note to the government as a policy thing is highlighted all the pitfalls and opportunities in net zero emissions. So that covers the complete ambit of whether renewable electricity or biofuels or anything like that.
Monishji, a quick comment on you on the ambitious target what you have set for PRESPL of 10 billion biomass-based bioenergy organization over the next 5-7 years. Could you share the current opportunities and challenges briefly, maybe 2-3 minutes, a quick comment?
Sure, thanks Manish. So not ambitious, but a conservative target is how I put it. And
conservative target. Sorry, yeah. I correct my question. Yeah.
No, it looks very ambitious because where we are or where the sector is. So your question is right, but how we look at it, it's still a conservative target. Why I say so is when we set up this target a couple of years ago and we put it out on our website, we were conscious of looking at the way the climate change aspects are going to play out in the bioenergy segment. Today we have from the Ministry of Power, National Bioenergy Mission for 20% co-firing of biomass in all coal IPPs, which means 140 million metric tons of co-firing to be done across all the coal plants. We have a target of 20% ethanol blending, E20, and Minister Gadkari since the last week is already saying why not flex engines and why not E100. So we are going to be moving towards flex engines. We will move out of the SIAM dictated 20% number and flex engines will come into India. So we see a huge requirement of ethanol. It could be first generation, second generation, third generation coming up. We will also find demand for sustainable aviation fuel, and World Economic Forum a fortnight ago has released the India SAF report, which clearly articulates right from the aircraft manufacturers to all the airports and players talking about it. And we also see a huge shift in the corporate mindset for moving away from the limited quantity of fossil fuels that they have been using in industries for the purpose of heating and cooling, where all of them are shifting to bioenergy. And when we aggregate all this demand, which is already live, so it's not that this demand is going to come, but if I aggregate the current live demand, it is 250 million metric tons to be done over the next couple of years. And what I do in Prespel today, or what we do in Prespel today, is hardly about 2 lakh tons currently. So being the market leader at 2 lakh tons and looking at the existing demand of 250 million metric tons, even if we continue to be the market leaders in this lifetime, the $10 billion number is nothing. So that's where the scope is. So what I see is at least, if not thousands, hundreds of Prespels coming up in the Indian market in the next 5 to 7 years.
Yeah.
Because there's no rocket science around the business. You only need to go to the fields and aggregate it. So the movement will actually start with people on the ground. And we are already seeing the rural entrepreneurship happening. And across forums, across platforms, I see people taking Prespel as the roadmap that if these guys can do it who don't understand business, well, we can also do it, and we can also start from the grounds. And this movement has already started. So Suhasji here is also, I think, is seeing this movement very closely now. So this demand will take it, and that's where I think our targets have been set.
What, in your view, is a good solution? Where is the balance lying? Basically, whether we like it or not, carbon pricing will be a political hot potato in the emerging countries, and just an equitable transition will also be a sensitive topic. It will keep making headlines and will come in the way of the 1.5 or 2 degree pathway. So what are your thoughts on this? What are solutions, and what you expect the Glasgow meeting will attempt to do around these?
Okay. So Namita, you go first, and then Mr. Krishan and Santosh, 2 minutes each, so that we can still finish on time and give time to Suhas.
Thanks. So see, I will take the part on the just transitions, and one must understand that is conceptually embedded as a part of the Paris Agreement, which was elaborated on the International Labour Organization's guidelines. So as far as India is concerned, the concept of just transition is relatively new in terms of policy as well as in terms of finance. But the message is fundamental that India's developmental path, India will go through multiple economic transitions, digitization as well as shifting to zero carbon or this whole energy transition, and that presents an opportunity for India to look at how fair this transition will be and how would it mobilize finance as it happens. So, it is very important that this entire transition is designed with positive outcomes on livelihood and also protect the most vulnerable, those who are most vulnerable to the changes in terms of states, regions, or employment. So, I'd say if you look at it, I just want to just a minute to elaborate on this. As the economy reduces its dependence on fossil fuel, it will have to be gradual. I mean, we are even today a fossil fuel dependent economy. While we're building the whole clean energy or the clean economy kind of aspects and responding to the adverse climate impacts. Both public finance and private finance will have to be looked at differently. So the whole systemic financial architecture would need to be looked at. Taxes, duties, any kind of royalties applicable to fossil fuels. How will that alter the fiscal space? I think that is very, very important. Also from a private finance lens, in terms of banks and investors, capital markets, how will they reposition their portfolios and work through the S part of the ESG? So, we've seen COVID really changed the whole, game where investors started looking at the S part. But even from a transition standpoint, the S, this is a kind of a new relationship that the companies will have to look at when they, when financial institutions fund consumers or fund companies. How will that impact adversely or positively livelihoods or the entire, sustainable consumption basket, healthcare? I think these are the elements that need to be looked at. We saw how the textile industry, which got washed out in case of Maharashtra or Mumbai, what kind of social repercussions it had. And there, the transition was not just at all. So I think that is a very important element from a just transition standpoint. And India will have to put a roadmap out very soon to look at this whole transition.
As far as carbon price is concerned, let me say no NX2 country is going to accept the carbon price. I mean, that on the table will not be there for negotiation. We will try to keep hammering away the NX1 countries as agreed in the Kyoto Protocol and etc. However, there are, apart from the countries taking net zero emissions commitments in the last few months, there's 100 plus corporates, right? That's another thing. Now, whenever these commitments are taken, there is an internal carbon pricing taking place. In the case of EU, we have the advantage is the EU ETS. And the EU ETS has actually risen about 60 euro in the last few months, So you have, if the EU ETS is 65 euro, then you got an internal pricing of at least 100 euro, no? You're nowhere otherwise, So that's the good advantage. As far as Indian companies are concerned, we will only benefit from this carbon pricing of two things. Either the Indian corporates, whether it's the Infosys or the Mahindras, etc., who decide to take an internal carbon price and make investment based on that. The second thing is that it's a little hazy, God willing, it will not happen. But cross-border carbon tax is a issue. We will fight it tooth and nail against it. But the reverse will happen on a subsidiary of a EU company or a UK company operating in India. So under those circumstances, people are going to make investment decisions based on carbon. So frankly speaking, I see enormous business opportunity for Namita. I think carbon disclosures, reporting on ESG metrics is going to be there big time. And carbon pricing will come in whether overtly as a compliance thing or as an internal thing, and that will decide decisions. The only other thing that we are trying to do and to ease things for people like you all, if we succeed with New Development Bank, I think it makes it easier for people. If somebody does the due diligence and there's a $200 million project, $100 million project, New Development Bank has given $30 million. I think it's downside easier for you to co-finance it.
Yeah, so maybe I can go now. So Jigar, in terms of the carbon pricing, I think there are two distinct dimensions which people need to understand, and people literally cross over between these two very rapidly. One is what we call as the offset pricing, which is around the Article 6, which is around all. That's a completely a little different in the sense that why the international border, but even today, even without Article 6, bilaterally it is getting traded. I mean, I know that in India the Scandinavians are buying. So that way there is something which is happening over there. The other one is a internal carbon price, which is a little different, which is around your business risk. Let us look at it. Today, a refinery column, when crude is pumped into it, there are more than 200 things which you bring it out. And the petrol and diesel are the cash cows. Now, tomorrow into the future, if the cash cows volume is reducing, and if your other chemicals you are forced to produce more, and if you don't have the market, what is going to be the economic models? Looking into that, if I want to make some investments right now, a capital investment right now, can I factor the price of carbon to overcome, the risk factoring part of it? That's a different economic model. Okay, so I think of course, over a period of time, there will be a kind of a level playing field between both these streams would happen at an international level. But today, if you really look at it, these are two very distinct. The way in which we go ahead and calculate the internal carbon pricing for a company is completely different.
Okay. Thanks, Santosh.
It's also quite lower. I mean, it's on one end of the spectrum, whereas the carbon price on offset is on the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah. Jigar, I just want to add one point here. So organizations like IFC, International Finance Corporation, have already started looking at an internal price on carbon. So what are the financed emissions that they are funding, and they are calculating a price in carbon. So I mean, in the developed market, there are financial institutions who are putting a price on the financed emissions, and it wouldn't be long for it to come into Asia or the developing market.
I think this was a very, very interesting discussion, and few words I wrote for myself in terms of what do I make out of this? What do I make out of the thoughts that all of you shared? I mean, all of you obviously shared your insight. There was an expression of passion. There was an expression of ambition, and somebody saying, well, that's not ambition, that's conservative. So I think there was, I thought the discussion was very lively and a lot to learn from. I've made several notes, but just to do a round of summary of the discussion, I thought I can divide everything which has been said in in three different sections. The first is investment and investors. And obviously, investors becoming more conscious. There are global standards being created, Europe being the leader. How do you have ESG focused companies deriving more value from the investors as well as giving higher value to the investors? The concept of lazy investing, and I think Santosh was absolutely right. A lot of times buzzwords become the reason why investment starts lining up behind certain type of companies. ESG may not be the driver, something else would be the driver, but ESG becomes the buzzword behind certain type of investment. My own fear is, for money to be starting to chase ESG investment, it will be extremely important that ESG does not become, does not fall victim to a checklist manifesto kind of a mechanism that you have a checklist and you tick against a certain number of questions and say, oh, that makes me an ESG investment. I think, I have seen it happening with ISO, I have seen it happening with several other standards in the past, and it's extremely important that that's not the way it goes. Binary green investment 0-1, is that the way for us as an economy, or should we have a model which is a transitionary model? An extremely good thought, creating a lens which is a lens of knowledge around technologies. I think the example that Santosh gave, especially with respect to EV and the number of years for capital financing associated with that. I think a lot of thoughts with respect to how should finance be structured, how should investments happen, and how should investors get educated around this space. I thought the second interesting line of thought which came out was around the biomass, bioenergy technology itself. The lazy investment was, kind of paraphrased as lazy solutions or lazy projects. Why first generation? Why not second generation? Why are we stuck with age-old ideas? Extracting ethanol from sugars and stuff like that. How do we create modern businesses? How do we create businesses which are driven by new technology? How do we create a pull strategy behind these businesses? And I think a wonderful example of Monishji in terms of how do you make capital chase your business rather than chasing capital. I think it's essentially about creating smart businesses. And look, no other sector, including technology sector, investment didn't start chasing, information technology because they wished it. Investment started chasing because there were smarter businesses which were created, smarter business models which were created. And I think, Monishji, you're absolutely right. That's the onus which is there on the industry. The last piece that I think came out, very eloquently from people like Mr. Kishan was around where to focus. Namita did talk about, looking at brown energy and not green energy, making examples out of things like Hindalco, address transition and create transitionary finance vehicles. A very, very valid thought. Lack of understanding or limited understanding around the options. Focus. So how do you create awareness around this? How do you actually make financial benefits into a driver? Maybe carbon pricing would be a vehicle, but in the end, investment would chase only if it makes financial benefit. So how does industry actually, wake up to that challenge and not say we are doing something which is for socially conscious or environmentally conscious? It has to be making financial sense for investment to be obtained. Policy will be driven by economics, and I think Kishan ji made a wonderful point. How do you drive economic benefits and economics as a reason for policy formulation? And the last point which was made by Santosh, I think, was a driving mindset change. How do you make sure that the mindset around this changes?